Does Proverbs 18 verse 21 imply that we are little gods or creators so much that we can use our mouths to speak things into existence or to create whatever we desire we want God to do for us? Is that what Proverbs 18:21 mean? Because Proverbs 18:21 says death and life are in the power of the tongue. And a lot of people have believed that through this verse we can speak things repeatedly by faith until they come into existence. Is that what Proverbs 18:21 mean? I don't mean to squash your faith or my faith, but scriptures must be interpreted correctly. And the golden rule for correct interpretation of scriptures is context. We must understand the bigger picture of this book and the surrounding verses of that verse, then we'll come up with the correct interpretation. The interpretation which the author intended. Now, first and foremost, if we want to get the correct interpretation of Proverbs 18:21, remember, the Bible was written to inform us, not to confuse us. The Bible is not complicated. For as long as you understand the rules or the regulations of interpretation for scriptures, and the number one rule for correct interpretation of the scriptures is context. So we want to use the principle of context to decipher, to decode the correct interpretation of Proverbs 18:21. So first and foremost, we must ask ourselves, what genre of book is the book of Proverbs? What is a genre? Genre is a word of French origin, which simply means a literary type, a type of literature, So when we understand, sometimes by understanding the genre of a biblical book, that will open our eyes and it will guide our interpretation, or that will lead us to the correct understanding of that particular book. So what genre of book is Proverbs? And the other question, which is related to this question of genre, should be, what is the overall theme of the book of Proverbs? So in terms of the genre or the type of literature in the Bible, the book of Proverbs is the book of wisdom, Hebrew wisdom literature. So it is a book. Now, if it's a genre of wisdom, you must expect that the contents of this book, they are mostly about wisdom applicable in this life. Wisdom that will guide us to succeed or to live well in this life. So Proverbs is a book of wisdom. And when it also comes to the overall theme of this book or the overall lesson, the book of Proverbs, the overall theme of Proverbs is practical application of God's wisdom for a life of righteousness, discipline, and prosperity. And the emphasis of this book of Proverbs, you mostly hear about the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So the genre is a wisdom genre, And the overall theme, the main lesson from the first chapter to the last, the book of Proverbs is largely about God's wisdom for life in this earth, Or wisdom for success, wisdom for well-being, wisdom for prosperity in this world, That's why if you read the book of Proverbs, you'll hear about the wisdom towards hard work, wisdom towards, how to live with people, wisdom how to deal with these different circumstances. So the book of Proverbs, in terms of ultimate context, in terms of genre or the main lesson, it is a book of wisdom, and the main lesson is the lesson of divine wisdom applicable in this life, so that you can live righteously, you can live with discipline, and prosper or succeed. And that's why this book, in the early chapter, the very first chapter, it begins with the statement that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, because God is wisdom. Just by saying these things, now you are beginning now to realize that if the book of Proverbs is largely about wisdom, divine wisdom, but applicable in this life, so that we can live disciplined lives, we can live wisely, and we can live prosperous life, then Proverbs 18 verse number 21, which says that death and life are in the power of the tongue, that verse is also largely a matter of wisdom in this life, And coming back to the same book of Proverbs, the book of Proverbs, largely the major thrust of this book is not to teach about God or faith or spiritual things. Let me repeat that, The book of Proverbs, its main purpose, its main focus, it is not to tell us largely about God, The whole Bible is about God. It is God's book. But because the book of Proverbs is a book of wisdom, wisdom in this life, its main thrust, it is not to tell us about theology, who God is, no. It is not even there to teach us about faith or very spiritual matters. No, but because this book is about wisdom. So the main concern of the book of Proverbs, it is to teach us how to live in this world, in this life, to live responsibly, and also to live in a disciplined way, in a guided way, in a principled way, so that we must live for God and live righteously and live successfully and prosper. So, it means, even that verse, Proverbs 18 verse 21, which says, death and life are in the power of the tongue. They fall under that thrust. It's a verse that is teaching us wisdom, okay? How to apply wisdom in this life. It's not about faith. It's not about spiritual things there. It's not even about prayer. It's not even about the confessions in the spirit. Once again, I don't mean to stop anybody from trusting God and making confessions. You can do that, but you have to interpret this verse correctly according to context. Now, having understood the genre of this book and having understood the main topic or lesson of this book, the book of Proverbs, let us also look at the immediate context. And in this case, that immediate context is chapter 18, where there is that verse number 21, which says that death and life are in the power of the tongue. So stay with me, because we're going to read a number of verses to understand the context, right? I'm going to take you to that chapter 18 of Proverbs. Let us start with verse number 2. Verse number 2, because our main verse is verse 21. But let me take you backwards to verse number 2. What does Proverbs 18 verse number 2 say? It says, a fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but takes pleasure only in expressing his opinion. In other words, Proverbs 18 verse number 2 is saying that a fool doesn't want to listen or to understand, but rushes to talk, to express his opinion. A fool does that. So that's not wisdom, to rush to talk without or before understanding something. That's wisdom. That's verse number 2. And verse number 4 says, the words of a man's mouth are deep waters. The fountain of wisdom is a bubbling brook, right? So once again, verse number 4 says what? The words of a man's mouth are deep waters. So you see, verse number 4 is warning us to say, be careful when you speak, because the words that proceed from a man's mouth can be at deep waters. You can reveal too much that can put you into trouble, okay? So that's wisdom. Verse number 6, listen, and I want you to pay attention that there is a repetition of words that have got to do with the mouth, the tongue, or the lips. All these words are analogies of the same thing, which is talking or speaking. So verse number 2 says, a fool only is interested in rushing to express his opinions. Verse number 4 says, the words of a person's mouth are deep waters. And verse number 6 says, a fool's lips walk into a fight, and his mouth invites trouble. So there is a repetition of lips, mouth, words, okay? Which means Proverbs 18 is largely about the wisdom concerning or related to how you speak in public, how you relate with people using your words. That's why verse number 6 says what? A fool's lips, they rush into a fight. In other words, a fool talks too much and he invites trouble because of the mouth. So the warning is that be wise in the way you speak, because you might invite trouble. Listen to verse number 7. Verse number 7 says, a fool's mouth is his ruin, and his lips are a snare to his soul. So you see, a fool's what? Mouth. And what else? His lips. So Proverbs 18 is repeating words to do with the mouth, lips, or the tongue. Now you see the context there? Beautiful. Context is the number one key for understanding difficult passages in the Bible. Any passage whose context is ignored will be forced to mean anything the reader presupposes. Proverbs 18:21, many people, by ignoring the context, they have interpreted Proverbs 18:21 as they have presupposed. But if you look at this, verse number 8 says, the words of a whisperer are like delicious morsels. Okay? The words, it means somebody who speaks slowly and softly, and somebody who is not too loud. His whisper is like a delicious meal. Nice bread. Okay? And those words, the Bible says, they go down into the inner parts of the body. All right? I can go on and on. Verse number 13 says, if one gives an answer before he hears, it is his folly and shame. You see, if you quickly talk before you hear, it's a problem. So if you understand this context, you can read the other verses on your own. You realize that on verse number 21, when the Bible says death and life are in the power of the tongue, it doesn't mean faith or confessions. It means that you need to use your tongue wisely. Because if you use it foolishly, it can put you into trouble, including death. But if you know how to use your words wisely, you can create good life opportunities and open doors and good connections because of using your words wisely.